Late night hikers. What is the creepiest thing you have seen while hiking? For a few years in my early 20s, I was living on the East Coast. My area ran right along the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I'd often go on short day hikes with a few friends along the marked paths in the afternoons when we were all free. A few times I'd gone alone, but I always kept to the same few areas and knew my way around well. On this particular day, I'd waited a little later in the afternoon for my friends so we could go up the trails. But they ended up busy, and I, feeling fat after a whole pizza for lunch with soda, decided to get in the car and go hike it off by myself to ease my guilty conscience. There were some particular trails I like to use. They shoot you straight up an incline to get your cardio in quick and hard, and then an adjoining, smaller path winds you back down around the other side of the face. About a third of the way down there are trees to the right and a steepish hill on the left that drops to a low spot where I could usually spot deer herds and fun stuff. I struggled going up that day, and I'd waited later than usual, so it was probably close to 7 o'clock by the time I reached the fork and turned back downhill. Mid-fall, this meant it was fairly dark by then. As I'm walking, I notice a person in the valley. She had on a long, pinkish-white dress, and by the way she was shifting and shuffling around it, looked like she was in the middle of a photo shoot. I couldn't see the photographer, and it was a little late for photos, but I figured the camera person was probably in the tree line, and they were likely finishing up after golden hour. I stopped to watch for a second, thinking how great a spot it was for some really awesome pictures. All of a sudden, it was as if she fell. She didn't lower herself. There was no crouching or sitting motion. It was more like a glitch in real life. She was standing, and then she was face down on the ground with her legs bent up under her body. I got this really awful feeling all of a sudden, like shivers down my neck. Without taking my eyes off her, she started crawling on all fours right up the hill toward the trail I was on. She wasn't on her knees, though. She was basically running on her hands and feet. Maybe I was just freaked out, but she was closing in far faster than it seemed like she should have been. It was almost like she had been sped up, but the rest of the world was still moving the same. I wish I could say I pulled my phone out and got video evidence, or at least took a picture, or was brave and kicked some spooky A, but I was suddenly overcome with an intense feeling of danger, and I fell or ran the rest of the way back to the parking lot without looking back even once. I peeled out of there and haven't gone back since. The weirdest part is that my car had been the only one in the lot when I got back to it, and that area isn't super accessible by any other park and hike type. Trailheads that I know of. I wrote it off as crazy drugs and nothing more, but I don't know. I told my friends, and a few of them went out later that night to investigate. Super duper smart idea, I know, but nobody has ever seen anything like that out there since. Story 2, I'd like to preface this by saying I do not believe in ghosts. I was walking through the woods after fishing for the better part of the day. I decided to stay out really late and try to catch some bullheads from a local watering hole. I was only about 13 and stayed out way later than I normally would. Usually I would take a trail home, but I decided to cut through some thicker brush to get to my grandparents' house so I could call my mom. I knew she would probably be freaking out a bit, even though this happened from time to time. There was an abandoned graveyard on my route. I don't remember the story behind it, but I knew it was there. I had wandered past it before, but never really checked it out. It was all overgrown and wild. I knew that if I followed the outskirts of the graveyard, I would hit the road and be home free. The day had been pretty chilly for a late spring day, but I swear in my teenage brain, it was getting colder. I remember looking at my breath and thinking it was weird how cold it had gotten. It was a pretty bright night, near full moon, but in the woods it was still hard to see. The graveyard was wide open, with no trees, and it was well lit. As I was walking up, I noticed the ground was covered in a thin layer of fog, and remember looking into the graveyard and not really registering what I saw at first. It was a person, which didn't seem odd at first, so I kept quiet and walked into the woods a bit more so I wouldn't get spotted. I didn't know who it was, and I wanted to keep clear. I stepped behind some trees and lost sight of them for a moment, and when I came back around the tree, they were gone. That was weird because I was behind the tree for only a few seconds at most. I didn't hear anything either. I walked a bit farther, keeping an eye out, feeling pretty creeped out. Near the graveyard was a rundown barn. I'm not really sure, but as I got closer to it, I could see that someone was inside. I got a good look, and it was a woman, probably in her 50s. The way the moonlight hit her made her look incredibly pale. She seemed to be digging, but I didn't hear anything. No sound of a shovel or her making noise in any way. I was maybe 30 feet away. I could see that she stopped and disappeared behind some debris. I decided to get the heck out of there and quickly moved toward the road. I tried to keep track of her, looking for where she went, but I couldn't find her. It was like she literally disappeared. I kept trucking and came out to the road. The fog was pretty much covering it, a small country road with fields on one side and woods on the other. As I walked down the road, she would randomly appear behind and in front of me, and I started hiding and basically playing cat and mouse. Each time I saw her, she was hard to see, only in the moonlight and stuck to the remnants of some of the old houses nearby. She always looked pale and never made any noise. Once I got past that part of the road, which had a number of barn foundations and home remnants, I never saw her again, and it instantly started getting warmer. It creeped me the heck out, and I never went that way again. I don't know who or what that was, but I told my uncle about it and he went to check it out, thinking maybe someone was trying to excavate the graves. He said there wasn't anything messed with. They thought I was lying. It still gives me the shakes just typing this out. I know it was most likely someone wandering around looking for stuff or checking the place out, but what teenage me remembers didn't seem natural. It was also weird that she never made any noise. She also seemed to be able to just appear and move around. At one point, she was right behind me, and I swear a moment later, she was in front of me. Story 3. One night, my friend and I decided to hike to the top of a small mountain at night for a meteor shower. There were 4 of us, all around 16 at the time, and we thought it would be cool. We drove over and started hiking. We took a break about halfway when we noticed there was a guy following us. In a business suit, we were weirded out, so we decided to start back up and walk a bit faster. But by the next time we stopped, he was like 10 feet away, so we bit the bullet to see if he'd just walk by. He didn't. He stopped and asked if we were there for the meteor shower, and if he could walk with us. Weird. A 30-something-year-old man in a suit wanting to hike with 4 16-year-olds. But whatever. As we were walking, my friend and I noticed he was walking really close to our friend, the only girl in the group, like he could smell her shampoo. We got to the top, sat down, and he sat almost right on her. With her reasonably freaked out, I made an excuse about why we had to leave early, and we promptly booked it the hell out of there, nearly running the entire way down. When we got back to the car, we thought, cool, we ditched the weirdo. But no. When we were all in the car, my friend pointed out that this guy was full-on sprinting down the trail toward our car with a large stick. Being in a car, we just drove out of there, very shook up. We chalked it up to some dude on some hell of a drug. But 2 days later, we all got a text linking us to a news report about a man who had strangled his wife and then proceeded to off another girl later that night on a hiking trail. It was the guy, the same dude at the same hiking trail. We never told our parents about the incident and never went back there, ever. Edit. A lot of people are asking for an article. I won't be posting it because it tells you my exact small town and state, but if you really want it, you can find the article with a bit of digging. Story 4. This one wasn't really hiking, but it was late at night. I was walking around my neighborhood alone, enjoying the night air and watching the stars. There was a little pond near my house with a wooded area beside it, some trees, a bench, and a rope swing that went out over the water. I sat down on the bench to look at the sky when I heard rustling off to my right, toward the trees. Bears weren't uncommon where I'm from, so I pulled out my flashlight and shone it around over there. I didn't see anything. That alone was enough to make my skin crawl, so I kept the light on and stayed alert, but I didn't leave. I stayed on the bench, trying to relax and keep watching the stars, which, in hindsight, is pure horror movie stupidity. A few minutes passed, and I didn't hear anything else. I leaned back against the bench and started to calm down. I was staring up at the sky with my flashlight pointed down so I wouldn't ruin my night vision when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. There was something in one of the trees. I couldn't tell what it was, but the branch was swaying slightly and the rustling noise was back. I sat bolt upright and stared at it. I didn't shine my flashlight on it yet, because the last thing I wanted was to blind or piss off a huge bird, or something worse. I don't think I have ever been that scared in my life. My heart was pounding so hard I could taste blood. I just watched it. The movement slowly stopped, but the shape was still there, sitting in the tree. Bears can climb, so I was afraid to run. If it was a bear, that would just make it chase me. So I stayed frozen, staring at that dark shape, trying to decide whether it was about to drop out of the branches on top of me. This one wasn't really hiking, but it was late at night. I was walking around my neighborhood alone, enjoying the night air and watching the stars. There was a little pond near my house with a wooded area beside it, some trees, a bench, and a rope swing that went out over the water. I sat down on the bench to look at the sky when I heard rustling off to my right, toward the trees. Bears weren't uncommon where I'm from, so I pulled out my flashlight and swept it over the woods. I didn't see anything. That somehow made it worse. I kept the light on and stayed alert, but I didn't leave. I stayed on the bench, trying to relax and keep watching the stars, which, in hindsight, is textbook horror movie behavior. A few minutes passed and everything was quiet. I leaned back and started to calm down. I had my flashlight angled down so I wouldn't ruin my night vision when something caught my eye in the trees. A branch was swaying. There was something sitting in it. I froze. I could hear the faint rustling again. I didn't turn my light on it right away. The last thing I wanted was to blind or anger a huge bird, or a bear. My heart was pounding so hard I could taste blood in my mouth. The movement stopped, but the shape didn't go away. So I finally worked up the nerve to raise my flashlight and point it at the tree. It was a man, a frigging man. He was crouched up there like some silent bear monkey. His face was completely blank, but his eyes were wide, too wide, just staring straight at me. The second my light hit him, he started to move, like he was about to climb down. I didn't wait to see if he did. I vaulted the bench and ran for my life. I ran straight home, slammed the back door, locked it, and didn't look behind me once. I went through the house checking every door and window, even the attic, just to be sure. I called the cops. They never found him. I didn't go out alone at night again after that, not without a knife or pepper spray, and not without constantly watching the dark. Because sometimes the thing watching you from the trees isn't an animal at all. Story 5. Used to often spend my summers bouldering with my friends by a relatively large forest that was about an hour and a half away from where I used to live. We used to spend some of the nights camping out there just to save some travel costs and time. Anyway, I think this was roughly like the third or fourth time we were out there camping. My friend had left all her climbing gear and her rucksack just outside her tent, or we definitely think she did anyway. The next morning, we found her boots, a few clothes, and all her chalk powder had disappeared. We figured it could have been completely feasible that she misplaced it, although we were quite sure that it was next to her tent. We didn't really want to believe that it had been stolen. Anyway, we didn't read too much into this and just stupidly told ourselves that perhaps she had left it by the boulders and some animal took an interest in it. I know it sounds stupid, but it seemed very reasonable to us at the time. Fast forward a year. We're at the same spot as usual, sitting by the tents and chilling after having some food. Mind you, it's pitch black out, and only the camp area is lit by the fire. I go somewhere a bit out of sight for a slash, and what do I see? A dude in a full-on ghillie suit laying on his stomach, looking right towards our campsite. I kinda stood there frozen as this dude clocked that I'd seen him, and he just bolted out of there. I don't know whether the event from the year prior was related to the ghillie guy, but this has definitely stuck with all of us. We haven't been back there since, which is a damn shame. Story 6, not hiking so much as car camping, but we were way out there in the middle of nowhere, on BLM land in Colorado. We drove for an hour and a half down a Forest Service road and didn't see another soul. You could see headlights and hear cars from miles away from our campsite. It's not like somebody could have snuck up unnoticed. We had 3 cars with us and 8 people. We had just finished eating dinner and cleaned up. It was getting dark, so we went back to the cars real quick before hitting our tents for the night. Somebody had slashed the front right tire on each of the 3 cars with what appeared to be a box cutter. Everyone thought it was a prank, but it became very apparent very quickly that it wasn't. All of us were beyond spooked, like panicking, scary to watch spooked. We all had spares, and one dude had a gun, so we threw on our donuts while that guy literally guarded us, and we got the hell out of there. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. Just knowing there was some person probably watching us, maybe wanting to harm us, makes me feel physically ill to this day. Edit, to answer some questions. This was south of Gypsum, and it was 100% not private land. This was a marked Forest Service road in an area with dispersed camping I had visited several times before. There were 3 guys and 5 girls. The guys were all together, cooking the whole time, leading up to us discovering the tires being slashed. These people are my best friends, and this would be wildly uncharacteristic of any of them. For those wondering how we didn't hear it, our cars were parked about 30 yards away from our fire and tents. A car coming down a road is easy to pick out from the sounds of nature. A gentle hissing gets lost in the wind. We heard it as soon as we started walking up. The tires were slashed in the exact same spot on the sidewall. It would be almost impossible for something on the road to puncture the tires like that. Also, there was no cell service. We called the cops and a ranger as soon as we got back to the highway, told them exactly what Forest Service road we were on, and gave them coordinates, but there isn't a lot for them to do. A cop told us it was good we were packing and to be careful out there. Story 7. When I was younger and stupider and going to college in the North Georgia mountains, my friends and I would go night hiking a lot on the trails near campus. I got pretty familiar with the area and with being out in the wilderness at night in general, which probably made me too confident. One night the full moon was out and the weather was perfect, so visibility was crazy good. Everything was basically washed in dim blue light. I was slightly stoned and feeling adventurous, and I love doing fun stuff alone, so I decided to go enjoy a night hike by myself. I took a flashlight, but this was around 2002, so no cell phone. I chose a super easy trail that was mostly flat, maybe a mile loop, in a pretty secluded area, but not exactly a national park or anything, just a very rural place. I didn't even need my flashlight for most of it, and just hiked in the moonlight. It was actually a really cool, beautiful experience at first. At some point, I started feeling uneasy, and maybe a millisecond later, I heard a man's voice. It was coming from a good distance ahead, of me, somewhere off in the woods, maybe from the right side of the trail. He was crying. I'm honestly an empathetic person, and 99.9% of the time, when I hear someone crying, I want to comfort or help them in some way. But this time, I felt sick in the stomach, like a dry panic attack, if that makes sense. I remember coming very close to calling out to him because my brain was trying to tell me he might be hurt, which was the only reason I hesitated, but it was like my body shut my voice down before I could say anything, and I knew I had to stay very quiet. He was sobbing like he had just found out a loved one had died, but also gibbering and almost babbling, like he was less than a person. There was a shrillness to it under his crying, like he was holding back a scream, but perpetually, on, as if he had been doing it all night. I remember it vividly, and my spine is tingling like crazy even as I write this. It's hard to explain, but I knew deep down he wasn't right in the head, and nothing good would happen if he realized I was listening. I went back the way I came. It was like I had tunnel hearing, and the only sound in the world was that crying. I was hyper aware of everything else around me, and beyond paranoid that I would snap a branch or snag my boot on something. I worried the man's crying would get louder if I wasn't paying razor-sharp attention, getting closer, or turn into an outraged, crazy person scream. Thankfully, it just faded the further I got from it, and I made it back to my car. Still, I was convinced some wild-eyed hermit was going to rush out of the forest and bite me to death right up to the second I locked my doors and got the hell out of there. I finally had the rest of my panic attack on the drive back. I managed to park back at campus, and I just sat in the car and collected myself. Adrenaline is frigging powerful. I have never felt a shred of guilt about leaving that guy crying out in the woods in the dark. I know I was slightly stoned, but slightly is the key word there. I'm convinced to this day I was in very real danger that night. Definitely not as insane as most of the stories and threads like this, but sometimes I get that same sick feeling deep down. Whenever I wonder what might have happened if the moon had been less bright, or if I had been more responsible and decided to use my flashlight even once. He would have seen me for sure. Story 8. I go out for walks very late at night fairly often, so I've seen a few things. The creepiest, though, happened about 2 months ago. I left the house around 1:30 in the morning, and it started off as a normal walk. I wandered around the town until about 2 in the morning when I decided to go home. I was walking back the route I had come when I noticed a black van meander down the street. I didn't really pay too much attention to it at first. I did pay attention, though, when I saw it slowly drive by me for a second time. I wasn't entirely sure it was the same van, so I just continued walking. But this time, I kept an eye out, and lo and frigging behold, about 10 minutes later, the same damn black van came down the street again. This time, I knew for sure, because it didn't have license plates. Now I was fairly scared, so I picked my pace up a little bit. When the van came around again this time, it stopped in the middle of the road a few houses in front of me. I stopped, turned around, and booked it back in the other direction. I made a few turns onto different roads and then ran right into someone's yard. I waited behind their fence and the same friggin' van came down the street. I assumed that when they couldn't find me, they finally decided to scrap off. But I waited in that yard for about 20 minutes before I ran back to my house and practically threw myself through my bedroom window. Edit, yes, I am a guy. I was also told to put in here that I was 15 when it happened. Story 9. This happened to me a few years ago. I used to go to school at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm a runner, and the campus is in a beautiful redwood forest, so I would run on the trails. One day I left, a little later than usual, on a run through one of the more isolated trails. Here's where it gets weird. I was about 15 minutes deep into the woods and still hadn't seen anyone else around. Suddenly, up ahead, I saw what appeared to be a homeless man in ragged clothing walking on the trail. He was heading farther into the woods, and this path went very, very far, and the sun was setting. Basically, this man was planning to spend the night out there. I wanted to reach my usual running checkpoint before turning back, so I decided to keep my distance and run by him. As soon as I passed the man, he called out to me. What came first, light or sound? In my head, I was like, what the hell? This guy is nuts. But I decided to humor him and yelled out, light, without looking back. He said, well, I think it's sound, but who knows? And started mumbling to himself. I kept going. I reached my goal and started to head back. It was really dark now, and I was feeling sketched out that I had to pass this guy again to get back. He seemed pretty crazy and potentially dangerous, but I didn't have a choice. I got past the point where I had first seen him, but he was nowhere to be found. There weren't any other branches of the trail, and if he had headed back, I would have seen him by then. He must have gone off the trail. Suddenly, a girl from up on a hill screamed for me to stop. I stopped and looked up, but it was too dark to see anything. I was freaked out. I called out to ask if she was all right and eventually saw her climbing down. The hill was really steep, so she had clearly put in a lot of effort to get up there and away from whatever was after her. She told me she had been on a run when a scary homeless guy started harassing her and chased her up the hill, but she didn't know where he went. She was going to spend the night there until I came along because she was too scared to go back down. At that point, we both wanted to get the hell out of there. Who knew if this creepy man was lurking around watching us from the dark? So, we ran back together and made it to the road. She thanked me, and we parted ways. I never ran that trail again. Santa Cruz can be a pretty weird place. I've heard legends of students flunking out of school there, and then just living in the forest. Maybe this guy was a student from years past. Story 10. Walking home from a party late at night. I was just enjoying the beauty of the city when I noticed a man walking about a block behind me. 2 blocks later, he was getting closer, so I crossed the street. What a coincidence. His route needed him to cross too. Half a block later, I crossed back. Oh hell no. Yeah, he crossed back too. About 2 or 3 blocks ahead, I saw a homeless person pushing a shopping cart. I started jogging toward them and called out, excuse me, I'm so sorry, but do you mind if I walk with you for a bit? Because I turned back toward my little shadow friend. This a-hole doesn't think I notice him following me. The homeless person turned out to be an elderly black lady. She didn't miss a trick. She pulled out this big A Bowie knife from her cart and waved it at the man in the lamplight so he could see. What you gonna do? You wanna play? Go home. The guy scrapped off fast. She was astounded that I had approached someone like her, especially since it wasn't immediately obvious she was female from a distance in the dark. I told her, I knew he was trouble. I figured even if you were a man, it was best to take my chances that you weren't. She walked with me for a bit, and we chatted about stuff. Nice lady. Story 11. My girlfriend and I had driven down an old dirt road that ran beside a lake on one side, with mountains on the other. We were looking for unexplored territory to hike in. The dirt road became a trail, and eventually was swallowed up entirely by the forest. Once the path became impassable by car, we got out and hiked for quite some time, then began making our way back to the car as the sun was going down. It was a challenge getting the car turned around, but I finally managed and we were off. It was slow going since it was a crappy road, and it was getting dark fast. Suddenly we came to a fork in the path that hadn't been visible coming the other way. Neither of us had any idea whether to go right or left, so I just picked randomly, hoping that both would end up taking us back to the main road. As we rounded a small curve, our headlights fell on a man dragging a large hockey duffel bag off the trail and into the woods. As soon as the lights hit him, he froze completely still. Driving past him felt like an eternity because we couldn't have been doing more than 5 miles an hour due to the crappy road. My girlfriend and I didn't say a word to each other until we were well past him, at which point we were both like, what the hell was that? Then the road ended. Just like where we had stopped the first time, the forest had swallowed up this part of the road. We were going to have to turn around and drive past the man with the human-sized duffel bag again. I told my girlfriend to buckle up and hold on tight, because at the first sign of trouble, I was going to gun it. We came to the spot where the man had been, and he was nowhere to be seen. We eventually made it to the right path and got the hell out of there. The weirdest thing about it was that there wasn't a vehicle anywhere near this guy for 50 miles in either direction. We would have seen it if there had been one. We'd traveled as far as possible both ways, and there just wasn't a place to pull off the road. How the hell did he get there? Where was he going? What was in the bag? Story 12. Not on a trail, but walking my dog late at night. It was about 1 in the morning. My dog rang her bell, and I begrudgingly got up to take her outside. When she wants to pee in the middle of the night, I don't take her very far, just into our side yard. I took a flashlight with me in case she decided to poop so I could pick it up. I was standing there waiting for her to do her thing, doing that little dog in a circle walk, when all of a sudden, she got spooked and whipped around. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw this chick just standing there. I didn't see her walk up. I didn't hear her walk up. She was just suddenly there, super still. Based on where she was standing, she had to have come from between my house and my neighbor's house, which was odd because behind our houses there's a green belt. It was probably around 40 degrees outside, and this lady, about 20, was in super short shorts and a t-shirt. I looked at her and told her she's scared. Me, and she mumbled something like, "Nice night, what are you up to?" Standing there holding my dog's leash, I said, "I'm walking my dog." Then she said, Cool. Do you know how to get into my house?" I locked myself out. And she pointed at my neighbor's house. Now, I'm a good American and I know my neighbors, and this wasn't my neighbor, who is a single 30-year-old woman. She hangs out with my wife, so I know her really well. So I asked, "That house?" pointing directly at my neighbor's place. She nodded. I said, "You don't live there. I know who lives there." She just scoffed and wandered her way into my backyard. I followed her and said, "What the hell are you doing?" She then took off running and scaled my fence, which is worth noting is not an easy fence to climb. It's a deer fence. It's see-through and goes up about 3 feet with a cattle gate. Then the top of the fence is stainless steel wire running horizontally. It's the kind of thing that, if you weren't expecting it, you'd easily trip over because it's extremely hard to see and not very common. Anyway, she scaled the fence and ran off into the green belt. I always have a pocket knife on me and was fortunate enough to have my, unfortunately, useless dog. So I looked around my house and my neighbor's house for other people, then shined my light into the green belt. There was nothing. I have no idea how she wound up back there, what she was doing, or what she intended to do, but she scared the ever-living crap out of me. Edit. Greenbelt means unincorporated land zoned so that nothing can ever be built on it, basically backing up to the edge of a forest, a cliff, or something similar. In my case, it was a wooded area for about half a mile of nothing. Rattlesnakes, deer, mongooses, and all kinds of animals live in that green belt. Edit 2. As an astute Redditor pointed out, mongooses and rattlesnakes don't coexist anywhere in the world. It is Texas, and I've seen crazy stuff back there. Possums, roadrunners, owls, coyotes, bobcats, deer on a regular basis, lots of snakes, skunks, and more. I am not an expert on local fauna, so I guess Rikki Tikki Tavi doesn't live back there. I just know there are tons of thorns and assorted shrubbery that make it an awful place to hang out. Common questions. Was she hot? In a different context, maybe. As a creeper chick leaping deer fences like Jason Bourne? No. Is my neighbor a lesbian looking for strange? No, she isn't a lesbian. Was it a meth head? That's my best guess. It was late, and she had the leaping abilities of a kangaroo. Picture of the fence. It is kind of hard to explain, but if you see the wires that go all the way across, it's made to keep deer from jumping. It also makes it super easy to trip on, especially in the dead of night. Story 13. It was summer, around dusk, and I was camping at a remote campground with my dad. There was a lake right next to this grounds, and my dad and I would trailblaze through the forest beside it, because if you went far enough, there was a really pretty waterfall. A few strange things happened on this hike. We found a slash pile that had a little kid's shoe on top. When we came to a small clearing, my dad had to take a leak, so he faced one side of the clearing and I faced the other. And we both clearly heard a child say, "I'm over here." My dad thought it was me, and when he realized it wasn't, we spent about half an hour looking for someone, but we found nobody. After that, we gave up on going to the waterfall and started making our way back to camp. But there were clear sounds of something following us. Twigs snapping, bushes shaking. We haven't been camping there since. Story 14. Probably too late for this thread, but I love telling this story because it's just so bizarre. So here we go. When I was very little, like 5 or 6, my dad used to take me on all sorts of adventures through nature, especially when we owned a little cottage up in the Scottish Highlands. My dad is sort of a combo Irish bloke and Yorkshire lad type of fellow and very spry, despite being about 55 at the time. On this particular occasion, he had decided we were going to go hiking way up into the cliffs. which made me quite happy since it meant a piggyback ride for at least 90% of the difficult parts. This was a proper trek. He wanted to get to one of the highest bluffs so we could have an amazing 360-degree view of the gorgeous meadows and some sparkling sea. But after we reached the top plains, where it's all short, wind-whipped grass and you can see for miles, he suddenly turned very still and very quiet. When you're small, your parents are basically God, so seeing your dad look frightened is scarier than anything your own mind can come up with. I was pulling on his arm and going, What? My mom is epileptic and I had seen her fits when I was a kid, so I thought it was happening to him too, or something similar, and I wouldn't know what to do because we were up on this huge cliff and no one was around. Then, just as fast as it started, he snapped out of it, firemen lifted me right up, and started striding away without a word. Over his shoulder, I could see a big pale yellow object stuck into the ground like an obelisk. I know now that it was a refrigerator. When I was older and I asked my dad about it, he stiffened up and told me that when he was a boy in the 1950s, he and his little friends had found an old-style fridge in the woods. Being little boys, they opened it. Inside was a body, another child who had somehow ended up inside and been unable to get out. My dad has never mentioned a gender, which makes me think he either saw someone badly decomposed or just a skeleton, but I can't ask him. Remember that episode of The Simpsons where they unlock Homer's PTSD and it turns out he found a dead body when he was a teenager? My dad grew increasingly uncomfortable the first time we watched that episode and excused himself to the kitchen before the ending. He has seen some gnarly things, but for whatever reason he will not talk about that dead child in the fridge, only that it happened. So, when he explained, I assumed it was the trauma and said something like, "Oh, Dad, that's awful. So, when you saw the fridge up there, it brought up the old memories?" He honestly looked at me with his big blue eyes like I was an idiot. I'll never forget it. "No, Amy," he said in a very low tone. "It was because it was the same fridge." Edit. I was a little girl, so there was no chance my dad was going to open the fridge while I was right there, and possibly relive the experience of seeing whatever a mummified corpse inside a fridge looks like. No, I don't believe it was the same fridge. It literally would have had to traverse an ocean. But I believe my dad genuinely thinks it was. Most likely it was a very similar make or model, and the sight of it just surprised him and sent him west. Someone pointed out it should have been reported, just in case. I have absolutely no doubts that he did, but he's in his 70s now, so I don't intend to ask. I guess if you're ever up in the cliffs of the Isle of Skye, just keep your eyes peeled for a big beige fridge. Story 15. Most of the time, it isn't what I see, it's what I hear. Big, heavy branches snapping just beyond the edge of my headlamp. Footsteps in leaves when I'm dead tired in my sleeping bag, too exhausted and afraid to even look. Probably nothing, I tell myself. Probably. One night after a late hike with friends, I came back to my SUV and found it covered in prints. Handprints, footprints, paw prints, I couldn't even tell which. They were huge, too big. Some of them dragged slightly in the dust, like whatever made them had been walking slowly, deliberately. We were parked near a military base up in the mountains, so maybe some local enlisted guys did it to mess with us. But the way it was done, methodical, almost theatrical, made it feel wrong. It looked exactly like something out of the Blair Witch Project. No animal did that, and whatever had, wanted us to see it. Story 16. It was around midnight in a big picnic clearing inside a popular hiking park. No lights, no people, just moonlight on the river and black trees everywhere else. I was there with my boyfriend. We were on one of the picnic tables trying to enjoy ourselves. I was facing the river, pale and shimmering, while he was facing the tree line, which was just a solid wall of darkness. In the middle of everything, he went completely still. In a low, flat voice, he said, "There's a man coming toward us." I turned my head. All I saw was a white t-shirt moving fast out of the trees. That was enough. I ran. I didn't even check if my boyfriend was behind me. I just knew he would be, and he was. We didn't stop until we were far, far away. Later, he told me the guy had gotten within about 25 feet of us before I bolted. The man never said a word. He just walked quickly toward us. I never did Midnight Forest stuff again, and I never will. Story 17. I had a group of friends who used to get together and play Manhunt in a local park at night. Just a different way of saying a big game of hide-and-seek tag, where 3 people start off it, and everyone else goes and hides in the park. As they find and tag people, they become it as well, until eventually there is only 1 to 3 people left. Then we start again and play into the early morning. Well, one night I was with my friend and his younger brother. We were heading to the middle of the park to a hot spot for hiding places. There is a long stairwell that leads up a huge hill to a pavilion and field. We were slowly walking down those stairs, maybe halfway down, when we noticed two folks way below us. Thinking it was one of our friends, we yelled out, "Hey, who's that?" Instead of the normal reaction, which is to call out your name, then sprint away trying to avoid getting tagged, a strange voice responded, "Who the hell are you?" We at first started sprinting down at them, like we normally would, but then we realized they too were sprinting at us. We didn't even hesitate. We turned around and sprinted up the stairs as fast as we could, adrenaline kicking in, hair sticking up on the back of my neck. We made it up on top of the hill and paused, and when I looked back, they were right behind us, not more than 10 feet away, which was absurdly fast because of how much distance we had had between us. We lost our crap and started sprinting as fast as possible to the park trail that wraps around the entire park and leads to a road where one of our friends lived and that we used as a meet-up spot between games. It's a 2-mile run back from where we were, so we booked it, sprinting as if our lives depended on it, occasionally looking back and seeing the two people following behind. As we got nearer, our energy was spent, but we pushed on and made it to the street. Looking back, there was no sign of the two strangers. All of our group was back at the house, lounging on the driveway, having decided to prank us that night. And while we were off in the park searching for them, they had met back at the house until we gave up. We shared our story with them, and some laughed in disbelief. Others wanted to search the park for those two randoms, but we never discovered who they were. All I know is that they were incredibly fast and shady as heck. Story 18. I was camping, and some of the group had gone off on a late-night stroll. After a while, me and a friend got bored and decided to go look for them. It was pretty much rolling grassland hills with few trees out there, so we figured it wouldn't be hard. It was also unearthly quiet, other than the occasional distant owl or coyote sounds, so we were whispering and being very chill. There was pretty good moonlight, so we hadn't brought lights either. Anyway, I finally saw someone standing under a tree on the crest of this hill, so I went up there first. I called out quietly and didn't get a response. Again, no response. Kinda annoyed, I just strutted up there, but I realized something looked weird about this person I'd been seeing. They were holding their arms over their head, and the proportions weren't right. But I think that was all kinda subconscious because I didn't do anything different until I got close enough to see that it wasn't a person at all, but a friggin' coyote that someone had flayed and strung up to the tree by the limbs like some kind of totem. I literally fell backward in shock. Turns out the woman who owned the property was no fan of coyotes coming after her livestock. She also woke us all up in the middle of the night, once with sustained AR. 15 fire, like 20 shots. Someone who lived near there just said, "Oh, she must have found a whole pack of them. Go back to sleep." Story 19. This wasn't on a hike, and this is pretty tame compared to some of these stories, but it's a bit similar. Back in our old place, one night my girlfriend and I were walking our dogs around the neighborhood. She's a lot smaller, so I was walking 2 of the dogs, and she was walking 1, who was a former service dog. He was a real gentle dog, albeit a bit older. Other than snatching the ball away from the others during fetch, he'd never shown a bit of aggression. I walked a bit ahead of my girlfriend because of the 2 dogs pulling pretty hard on me, but not too far. Maybe 10 or 15 feet ahead, but around a corner. As I found out later, she'd slowed down in part because she'd noticed someone nearby acting strangely, scoping out a house, I think. When he spotted her, he said hi, and she responded in kind, asked how he was. Before he could answer, the dog she was walking started to growl, and she apologized, commenting that he was a guard dog. The guy looked at her and said, "Well, he's doing a good job tonight." She was pretty spooked and hurried to catch up to me. We were more careful on nighttime walks from then on. Story 20. I drove to a park to go hiking at night in the mountains. So safe, I know. I hadn't even turned off my car, and I already felt like I was being watched. There weren't any cars around, so I thought maybe it was just me being paranoid for some reason. But for some reason, I looked to my right and saw this weird-looking humanoid shape on top of the little bump hill about 50 feet away. At first, I thought it was a weirdly shaped tree until I saw the arms move, no wind at all. So now I knew there was a person staring at my car, trying not to move, for what I assumed was to get me to leave and go to a more secluded area, as we were next to the road. Of course I left. I don't go hiking at night in that particular park anymore. Story 21. I was out taking my dog on a short walk so she could go to the bathroom. She was a rescue and at this point terrified of everything, so getting her outside was always a task. It was around 4 a.m. and she was whining at me. I figured she needed to go, so I put on some shoes and took her outside. It was a warm night since it was July in Missouri. I was walking down the street from my apartment complex when I saw a figure standing under a streetlight, not moving. Thinking it was just a guy out for an early morning run, I kept walking. That's when this figure started to move toward me in a weird fashion. He wasn't jogging, wasn't walking. It looked like skipping. Thinking to myself, what the hell? I stopped walking. That's when my dog started growling from behind my legs. I'd had her almost 6 months and had never heard her growl or bark. I turned around and walked back into my complex. I looked over my shoulder, and this dude was standing at the entrance to my apartment complex, head to toe in black clothing, grinning from ear to ear. I was fully in a what the hell is this BS mode and walked farther into the complex while checking to make sure Smiles wasn't following me. I started to walk toward my entrance, and he turned and slipped away into the night. I went and talked to my landlord the next day, and she told me they'd had multiple reports of this guy skipping around the complex late at night. But whenever the cops showed up, he was gone. Story 22. I didn't actually see anything, and I'm really glad I didn't. A friend and I had started walking a trail system that leads deep through some woods and fields by his house around dusk. During the day, it's really peaceful and green and whatnot, but it was late and getting dark fast. The area we live in has been flooding recently, and the trail was currently 2 feet underwater, about halfway through the loop. But my friend said we could walk to that point and then take a shortcut back to the beginning, through one of those man-made pine forests where the trees are all perfectly lined and spaced apart. We only had to go about 50 feet into the pines before the canopy made it pitch black all around us. But he knew the area, so we kept going. About 100 feet farther in, we both heard a very distinctive squeaky door noise. Like, literally no chance of it being anything other than old rusty hinges. He'd come through here 20 times in the past few weeks while jogging during the day, and confirmed that he'd never seen any type of building or anything with a door back there. We both decided that we'd rather just walk the trail back the way we came than deal with whatever horror movie crap was happening in there. I've never noped out of a situation faster than I did then. Story 23. I walk at night in my rural area regularly. I've encountered black bears, coyotes, bobcats, angry deer, and everything on down with no real concern. But the creepiest encounter was a little black pickup truck with rainbow and unicorn stickers, bubblegum pop music blaring, and it smelled like cotton candy when it passed me. The first time it passed me, it swerved to hit me. I jumped out of the way easily. I thought nothing of it really, just figured they were startled by seeing me at night with my reflective gear. The truck circled back and came at me again. I saw it coming this time, and grabbed my dog up just in time to jump into a ditch. I heard little girl laughter, high-pitched and maniacal. The tiny truck circled back for a third go at me, but by then I was hiding in my neighbor's shrubbery. I watched it slowly drive down the road, hearing giggling as it passed me. Fortunately, it kept on going, and I made it home just fine. Story 24. I wasn't hiking, but I think this story is worth telling anyway. One night around 3 a.m., I was driving home from a friend's house just outside of the city. The 4-lane road was very busy during the day, but totally dead at this time of night. As I approached an area wooded on both sides with a bridge overhead, I noticed from far off that there was a figure in the middle of the road, so I started slowing down. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman with matted hair and tattered clothing, facing my direction down the center of the lane, and there was something in her mouth. After a moment, I was close enough to see that it was no small amount of twigs and small branches clutched between her teeth and sticking out both sides of her mouth because she was biting down on them. Her eyes were wide and bugging out, staring at my approaching vehicle. I know this might sound dumb since I was inside my moving car, but I think I let out a little scream because the sight was so disturbing and I came upon her so quickly. What's worse is that I quickly changed lanes to go past the woman, but whichever direction I went in, she moved. Quickly and decidedly toward my car, as if she was going to jump in front of it. I swerved a few lanes over to give her a wide berth, drove past her, and just kept going. But the feeling took a while to leave me, and the walk from my parking spot to my apartment in the dark a few minutes later was an uncomfortable one. To this day, I think it's the eeriest thing I've ever seen. Story 25. Yellowstone National Park in October of 2015. I'm kind of an avid amateur photographer, and one night around 4 a.m., I was out alone in the Firehole Basin region of the park. The goal was to take a long exposure photo of a geyser erupting, with the Milky Way stretching through the sky overhead. The photo turned out to be pretty much a bust. When geysers erupt, they blow massive amounts of steam into the air, and steam kinda blurs that whole beautiful night sky situation. But anyway, I parked my car and hiked a ways to get close to the geyser I wanted to photograph. Then I set up my tripod, adjusted all the settings, and waited for the eventual eruption. The night was crystal clear, perfectly quiet, and very cold. As my ears grew accustomed to the lack of sound, I gradually realized I could hear the gentle burbling of the spring that gives birth to the Firehole River, some distance behind me. I could hear wind in the trees and leaves rustling across the ground. In front of me, I could hear rumbling and hissing from deep within the earth as the white dome geyser worked itself up for another inevitable eruption. An owl hooted somewhere above me, and I could even hear the distant howls of wolves across the bowl of the Midway Valley below. As my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, I could see the Milky Way stretched like a river of light from horizon to horizon overhead. 1,000,000,000,000 stars shined above, brilliant and cold. Orion hung over my right shoulder, and Venus burned just above the horizon, so bright it almost hurt to look directly at it. And then behind me, loud and sudden, the pounding footsteps of a giant, clearly coming right at me. Bear, Bigfoot, some hideous monster, born in the hell of a geyser's boiling mouth, spewed upon the land to wreak vengeance? I didn't know, but I knew it was coming, and I knew it was close. The buffalo actually brushed against me as he went past. I was frozen in place, resigned to my fate. A huge bull, a mountain of fur and horns, shambling up out of the darkness, steam billowing from his nostrils in the cold, dry air. It felt like a close encounter with a freight train. He strode past like I didn't exist, seemed to tiptoe gently around my tripod, then stopped about 10 feet in front of me and took a long, slow, very satisfying, steaming piss on the ground. Then he grunted and went on his way, and I stood there wondering how I was going to take a photo if the geyser blew before my hands stopped shaking. Edit. I dug around a little and found the photo I ended up with that evening when the geyser finally got around to erupting. Like I said, the steam pretty much scrambled the star field, but I caught a lucky break with the shooting star. Story 26. I'm late to the party, but years ago some friends and I were going to have a campfire at a lake late at night with copious amounts of alcohol. When we got there, we had to drive around a barricade, and one of the cars got stuck in the mud. While trying to get it unstuck, I looked around and made a joke about how we were definitely in the beginning of a horror movie. We all laughed about it. We got the car out and continued to the lake, got all set up, fire going, music playing, drinks flowing, and we were having a great time. All of a sudden, some random frigging guy came walking out of the woods with a beer. I got nervous, but everyone else told me I was being paranoid since I watch a lot of scary movies. They invited him to join us, and he ended up sitting next to me, but a few feet away. I went to grab another beer from the cooler, saw the hatchet that someone had brought, and decided I was going to hold on to it. I sat back down, and this random guy made some comment about how he could see my jugular and wanted to bite it. I was ready to piece the hell out, but of course I hadn't driven. A little while later, he made a comment about how he should have brought his chainsaw. I was completely alone and thinking this was going to end badly, so I moved across the fire and closer to the cooler and one of my friends. I set the hatchet next to me, tried to ignore the guy, and enjoy my night. Fast forward a bit, and the guy was making more weird comments, so I reached for the hatchet. It was gone. I started glancing around, discreetly at first, when the guy smiled at me from across the fire and said, "Looking for this?" and held up the hatchet. I said, "Screw all of this, I'm leaving," and managed to get one of my friends to go with me. The next day everyone said that nothing else happened, but as someone who has seen a lot of movies, I wasn't taking any chances. I'm white, but I'm not laugh off a crazy guy with a hatchet white. Story 27. Hiking in central Maine, near the 100-mile wilderness section of the AT, about as thinly populated as you can get in the lower 48. My wife and I pulled up to the trailhead at about 2 a.m. after a long drive and epic storms, and decided to catch a few Z's before hitting the trail at sunrise. After settling in, we noticed a blinking light on a distant mountain. There was no illumination for miles and miles in any direction, so it stuck out immediately, and we commented on it likely being the only radio tower for 50 miles. Then the light started slowly moving down the hill. It was maybe a couple miles off, and we both got interested. We figured it must be some truly insane bastard coming down the mountain in the darkest part of night with a headlamp. and the blinking was when a tree obscured the line of sight. It kept coming and picked up speed, and at that point, we started to make casual jokes that it was coming right toward us. I can't remember how long we had the car's lights off, but at that point, we turned them back on as we were starting to feel a little creeped out. We watched the light come down the hill, covering the couple of miles in a minute, maybe 2. Then it was right outside, about 20 feet off the ground and blinking. We grabbed a flashlight to try to see what it was, but could see nothing. It was just a blinking light about the brightness of a dim streetlight, appearing every few seconds. It hovered there for around 20 minutes, then was suddenly gone. To this day, we have no idea what it was. I assume some kind of giant glowy bug, but I've lived in the country most of my life and have never seen anything that bright or a bug move that fast. Story 28. My wife walks our dogs late at night. She heard a sound and couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It was a high-pitched whining like a radio-controlled car, and it seemed to be coming from the graveyard near where she crosses a road. She figured an electrical box had failed and continued walking. Both dogs immediately started alerting and staring at the graveyard behind her. Then she saw the culprit, a quadcopter. Now remember that it was past midnight. The quadcopter didn't have any running lights, and it started to follow my wife. She was more than a bit upset, so she messaged me and asked me to be ready to drive and pick her up. The quadcopter continued to follow her and matched every turn she made. She told me she was scared of it, knowing where we lived. She was ready to call the police when the quadcopter turned around and headed off. I drove to pick her up, and we drove out of town to approach our home from a different route. The next day, we asked the local online community groups about it. It turned out that this quadcopter had been following women to their homes for a few days. The police were notified, but the quadcopter's pilot decided to lay low, and the police couldn't find anything. We're assuming the pilot saw the forum discussion about them. Sorry it's not a Wendigo or an alien, but it was creepy as hell to the people who were being followed. Story 29. Not intending to mock any religion or beliefs, and I really don't know which group this would be credited to anyway. Wiccans? Druids? Just a psycho? Anyway, I was hiking through a park in Central Florida about 3 years ago. Kinda dense scrub brush. You could only see the trail in front of you, with brush chest high on both sides. I was about 2 miles from the nearest trailhead, and it was around 7 p.m. I had an hour of light left, and had intended on setting camp when I found the next clearing. The first clearing I got to had a gator head in the middle with a circle of stones around it, maybe 2 to 3 weeks old. Just a dried skull with scales, the soft tissue gone. I had seen gator skulls left by poachers before, and usually ignored it, but it gave me a weird vibe, so I kept walking. About 15 minutes later, and deeper in, I got to another nice-sized clearing. This time, a few dead birds were strung up to some sticks and hanging in a circle, like a mobile over a baby crib. 7 or 8 small birds, maybe 4 feet across. It had been there for a while. It didn't smell anymore, at least, but it was still creepy enough to send me on my way. Third time's the charm, right? Wrong. 20 minutes later, after taking side paths to get away from the main trail and hopefully avoid any other displays, I found a fresh one. A deer head on a stick, with sticks scattered around, making 4 circles around the base. Blood was splattered all around the sticks, fresh enough for the flies to still be on it. The head smelled rancid. I didn't see the body, but I didn't look for it either. I got out of there. It was dark before I got back to my truck. I called Fish and Game the next morning because the gator and deer would have been taken out of season. I told them what I found, and apparently this wasn't the first time somebody had called about animal effigies in that park. I never went back, but I am curious how many other shrines were out there. Story 30. A few friends and I went on an overnight hike in the Rockies behind our little town a few years back when I was in high school. Our campsite was pretty far up there, and it was getting dark. The spot we were at was nestled in a grove of trees, secluded from the wind and elements, so we decided to stop there for the night. The 4 of us built a little fire, ate dinner, then just talked for a few hours. Then all of a sudden, my friend leaped forward and doused the fire with our emergency water, plunging us into complete darkness. Needless to say, the rest of us were pretty pissed, as there was no reason for him to do this. He quickly shushed us, and we realized he was absolutely terrified, so scared he couldn't even speak or move. The rest of us managed to get a few words out of him, and he told us to look up on the ridge where we should have been camping. It was pretty far up, so it was hard to see at first, but that sight will haunt me for the rest of my life. There was a fire, a big one, like a bonfire. Around it were several figures moving in a slow circle. They were humanoid, but not quite, with arms and legs like people, but something about them just seemed wrong. almost like their limbs were too long and skinny or something like that. They just kept moving around the fire in a slow circle over and over. One of my friends claims he could hear them singing something, but I don't remember that part. More importantly, there was one standing off to the side a little way, leaning with his arm on a tree branch above his head. It really creeped us out, but we were able to sleep it off, figuring it was probably a scout troop having a camp or something. Morning came, and we finished off our hike to the peak. On our way down, we passed the place where we had seen the figures and decided to check out the camp. It was completely deserted. It was obvious there had been a fire, and there were footprints everywhere. Inside the fire pit was a small mound of charred animal bones, probably chipmunk, and a pile of 4 or 5 rodent skulls that had been burned. Creepy, right? Then we looked over to where the one figure had been standing. There was blood. Not a lot, but enough to be creepy. Then we saw the tree branch he had been casually leaning against. It was well over any of our heads, and I'm over 6 feet tall. That would mean that in order for the figure to lean against it like he would have had to be at least 7 feet tall. Needless to say, we got off that mountain very fast, and I have never been up there again. We called the Fish and Wildlife Rangers and told them what we saw. They said it was probably just a bunch of kids messing around and not to worry about it. It might have been just that, and maybe we let our imaginations run wild, but all 4 of us swear to this day that we saw the same thing, and it didn't look like a bunch of kids in the dark. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but those mountains still scare the hell out of me, and I will never go back there again. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but there is something out there. Ghosts or dumb kids, and I'm not going near it. Story 31. A bear. It wasn't late night, but the sun was setting. A bunch of friends and I went up to a cliff diving spot we knew. After a day of swimming and other activities, a park ranger saw us and told us to follow a certain trail back to the parking lot because it was faster. This was a trail we hadn't seen and didn't take on the way up. We said F it and decided it would be fine. After about 1.5 hours of hiking and being lost on the trail, we came to a clearing in the forest with no more trail, just what was left of it and a crap ton of vegetation. No problem. Turn around, right? That was the first time I ever saw a bear full on in person. The first thing I thought about was how screwed it would be if we had to run, and even worse if someone got caught. We just saw it, backed up, and decided screw it. Better to walk down the mountain than try to go around it. This isn't creepy, but it definitely spooked me. Story 32. I go hiking in the woods that permeate my town, sometimes so late that I get to see the sun rise out there. The strangest thing I ever saw was what I could only describe as a shantytown, built up seemingly overnight deep in the woods. Simple little hovels made of scrap metal and bed sheets, and a small fire pit that someone had made out of an old tire, with the fire still burning. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was that this was well past midnight when I found this place, and it was quiet as a grave. There was no one there. Someone had gone to the trouble of getting a fire going and then left it. From the look of it, this place could hold about a dozen or so people, and yet there was nothing there but the fire they had abandoned and whatever possessions they had left in the shanties. Story 33. We were camping upstate New York at a New York State campground. There were about 40 other campsites, and it was at capacity. 10 p.m. is quiet time, and it is enforced. It was around 1 a.m., and everyone was asleep. I was dreaming, and in my dream, I heard a young girl yell out, "Help me," from pretty far away. In my sleep, I was thinking how weird and realistic it sounded, and then I heard it again and woke up this time. I checked on my kids, and they were still there. It was pitch black outside, and every time I had heard it before I was asleep, so maybe I had been dreaming it. Then I heard it for the 3rd time. "Help me," not yelled, but loud, with a definite sense of fear and urgency, and she was deep in the woods away from the campsite. This time it sounded farther away than the last. I was trying to figure out what to do. Was somebody dragging her to her death, or was an animal attacking her? It was the middle of the night and pitch black outside the tent. I armed myself with my pocket knife locked open and left the safety of my tent, ready to attack, wondering what the news articles would say about my heroism and my subsequent death by a murderer or wild animal. At this point, there were other campers yelling out, "Where are you?" followed only by her responding, "Help me," which was getting farther and farther away. I was pretty freaked out by then. Maybe 4 minutes had passed, and other people had joined in the search when we heard someone say, "We found her." I walked over to one of the sites with the people who had been searching, and they said they had found her. She had been sleepwalking and walked into the woods. Apparently, she does this a lot. Going back to sleep after that was challenging. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.